Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me on the Lori and Tal Paul Show. I'm Lori Heinzelman, career and leadership coach, and I am joined today by my guest, systems thinker and transformation expert, Quincy Jordan.
Oh,
Woo!
well, thank you, Lori. Thank you. Very glad to be here. Thank you for having me on the Lori and Tall Ball show. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Thank you.
really appreciate that.
Thank you for joining. I've actually been thinking of having you on for quite a while now, Quincy. And one of the reasons is because you exhibit leadership, in just the way that you speak and the way that you think. And I wanted to share that with you, but then also with the listeners, the viewers here, because Quincy and I have actually never met in person. Um, we've never met in person. And it was during COVID, actually. It was during COVID. And when I was still in the Agile space, and Quincy was working for Agile Thought, I
Right.
believe is the name of the company. And during COVID, when we had nothing else to do, you hosted these little talking sessions or something. And
Mhm.
one of them was shared with me. So I didn't know Quincy. He was part of the conversation. I honestly don't remember if he was leading it or just a part of it, but I remember as we were speaking about how people should be treated or how a leader should
Mhm.
show up, just the way that you answered and conveyed the message really hit me because as someone who was in that transformational space trying to help leaders and teams work better together,
Mhm.
they needed people like someone who sort of exhibited those types of behavior. So I wanted to share that because I sort of just started connecting with Quincy. Like I started looking at what he was posting and what he was saying and found him on LinkedIn. And that's kind of how we connected. Same
Uh,
mindset, maybe.
I very much appreciate that. I consider that a great compliment. So, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's interesting because you share things. I mean, whoever, shares things at times. I've shared things and you hope that things land the way that you intend for them to land, and sometimes you don't know. And that is one of the great appreciations that I have for feedback loops. So get receiving that type of feedback from you is very much appreciated. And it's yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, and exactly like you said, we don't often receive that feedback. Sometimes we have to elicit that feedback, right?
Mhm.
Tell me how I'm doing. Does this hit with you or not? Sit with you, right? Am I missing the mark completely? And so that's why I wanted to share that with you, but also so people knew a little bit about how we're connected.
Yeah. Also, you were a client of Agile Thought at
Yes,
one point. I wasn't directly part of that engagement, but I was indirectly in like way in the background, part of it during your boss years. So
that's right. Yes, because we sought that help. And what I loved about Agile Thought, when Agile Thought came in to tell my company, Bosch, like what we needed to do to improve, or how we needed to improve, or
mhm.
even how to set up this system and this feedback loop that you're talking about, like those connections where how we should communicate, who should be involved, is it just reinforced all the things that we had already said to
Yeah,
the leadership. I think they were looking for an easy solution. And the fact that your company came back in and said, no, leaders, you really have to do the hard work to make this work. It felt good for my part. And that was some
good,
learning for me as well. So,
good. Yeah,
I want to ask a question, Quincy, because some
sure.
people may not know what systems thinking is. I introduced you, in that way, systems thinker.
Sure.
So
Yes.
what is that? What is systems thinking?
So the way I like to think about it, which aligns with the uh, most common definitions, but the way I like to think about it is considering the whole and the interdependent parts and the importance of not just the individual parts, but how those individual parts of a system interact with one another, how they're related to one another. how they need one another, how they uh, can't exist in the way that they should without the others. It doesn't mean that there aren't parts of a system that can operate in isolation, but it's important to know, even when that is the case, how it affects the overall system. So it's really just thinking of the big picture without losing the granular aspects. That's really the way that I think about it.
Do you have an example, maybe, of where you might make a change or something is happening within a system that is impacting the larger part of that system? To help clarify that a little bit.
Sure. So I've done a lot of transformation work, that, as you're, aware of. And within transformation work, one of the things that tends to occur or pop up is that folks just simply don't know what they don't know, which means there's a certain level of training, education, something like that that needs to occur within that particular organization. How that information becomes disseminated throughout the organization is key. Not necessarily just a communication plan, but how you get several parts of the organization to understand the same thing in the same way so that they can then express it in a way that makes sense for them. So those parts of the organization, that's one aspect, because I was thinking about a very particular client from the past where, well, multiple clients, but one in particular where, that was a very key, aspect was, okay, how do we get everyone up to speed really quickly, but without it being reckless in how it's done? Because it was a much needed part for that new system of the organization to work. Does that work?
Yeah, so yes and no. I'm thinking a little bit deeper here. And
Okay.
I'm thinking this from this side. When you tell that story, I know what I immediately think of, and you probably already envisioned some client, right? And some clear example in your head. And I don't want to talk about, this client did this
Yeah.
wrong, and we don't need to name names. But so I see something, and for me, it's the corporate side, right? Specifically
Mhm.
automotive. So how the engineers work together with the managers versus maybe something that came down from top management, like a
Right.
VP, and the rollout of a system. I'm wondering how, like, what that looks like, maybe from your side. Another example that might, or even more general for the audience who maybe has not had experience at the level that we have.
Sure. So maybe, so say for just the everyday uh, worker, knowledge worker at a company, maybe they are a developer or they're QA or whatever the case. So it's really important for them to know how the work that they're doing at that moment, how it ties to a top line business objective, let's say. Uh, because what I've found oftentimes is a lot of people do not know.
Isn't
And
that
they
crazy?
do not, yes. And they are literally just hands on keyboards and they're just in there doing their thing. They're almost on automatic, which is very dangerous to me within an organization because that means you have people making decisions without considering the vision, without considering the bigger goal. Um, and so that's something that I think, many people probably, could relate to is, all right, how does the work that you're doing right now, how does it support the top line objective? And I don't mean from a performance evaluation standpoint. I mean
Hmm.
from a very, is it effective standpoint? Is it bringing that type of impact and driving the type of outcomes that you're looking for down the line? And that actually occurs not only at the team level, but people would be very surprised that middle management and even higher, they have those same challenges. They hit automatic. Yeah, they're on like auto mode, and uh, they're not really thinking about how does this actually tie to our objectives.
How have you helped close the gap there?
So,
Or even raised
it-
awareness? Because that's key, right? Raising awareness
right.
first that it's occurring in the first place.
So I'll tell you how I generally start. So I generally start, there's usually some type of discovery, some, one-on-one interviews or group interviews or something like that, during some type of discovery period.
Mhm.
During that period, I am trying to assess, number one, where things stand, where are the risk areas, where are the gaps, where are those types of things. And one of the first questions that I ask is generally, let's say it's a group interview, and I'll ask, write down on a sticky the vision for the company and the vision for your specific area. And people would be very surprised how many people cannot do that. I mean,
I
really
wouldn't.
can't.
I, yeah, I wouldn't. But you're right.
Yeah, and so that one, the eye opener is not necessarily for me as much as it is for the room. Because some of the things that I would hear is, well, I can't say it, I can't quote it word for word, but we kind of know the gist of it. Sure, no problem. Share it. Let's hear it. And even with leadership teams, and I mean executive leadership teams, when they start reading what they wrote down, they're generally pretty surprised that they're writing down not just different words, but the meaning is actually pretty different oftentimes. And so if the meaning is pretty different when asking something like, what is the vision? That's that's pretty critical because how can you structure your objectives, your goals, and you don't really have a good grasp on where you should be headed? And so that oftentimes is kind of the start of closing that gap. I'm also a big proponent of OKRs, which are objectives and key results.
Mhm.
And so I think that's a very effective tool in helping to close that gap. But yeah, just having those conversations, bringing that awareness, um, making it okay that maybe we all don't recognize that that gap has been there, but also making it okay for us to now close this gap as well, and in an active way.
So, Quincy, I can hear people in my head already, right? If they don't know the vision, or I don't know my company's vision, but I can still do my job, right? I do my job and I do it well and I deliver what's expected of me. Why do I need to know the vision? How do you answer something like that? Like, why do I need it when I'm already doing my job well? I get good performance reviews.
Well, so the question for me would be, what is the nature of your job? There are some roles in companies where maybe it's not as critical for them to know the vision in that way. I do think it's valuable for everyone to, regardless of their position. But, there are some positions that it may not be as critical. You were talking earlier about automotive and maybe the person on the assembly line, maybe it's not quite as critical for them to necessarily know the vision in that way. But then that's where the second part comes in for me, which are the values. And so, how aligned are you to the values? Because even if you're in a role where knowing the vision actively is not as important, the values are, because that is going to help guide how your work, the quality of your work should be. It should be good anyway, because you just want to deliver quality work. But you also need to be aware of what that should mean in the context of the work that you do within the organization that you're working with. So yeah, there are some people who, for sure, I understand would think that, and in some cases, a little rightfully so. But there is still value in them aligning themselves in the work that they do, as well.
From my side, I would also think that it ties into the goals. You mentioned goals a little bit, right? But
Yes,
um, understanding the vision a little bit better helps you understand the goals that are set for you. And if they
right.
align, that's even better, right? They should align because if they don't
Yeah,
align, then you can start to question that. But if you don't know the vision, you can't question that at all,
right.
right? So, but I feel like when your goals align with the vision, that it does help motivate an employee a little bit more because they see their purpose behind their job and they see how they're
Yeah.
helping the company as a whole.
Yes. And so if we tap into the motivation piece, then absolutely, which should be there. So that motivation piece of one is does a person have intrinsic motivation for the work that they do? Some do, some don't. And then uh, there are some cases where, okay, how are people being incentivized to work, which is another aspect, and everyone usually goes straight to compensation and all that. But as you mentioned, purpose and feeling reward statistically outperforms the financial piece. Not that we ignore the financial piece because it is important, but there is a short limit, on that in terms of how it causes people to perform almost to the extent of saying, well, how are people performing when no one's looking? Like that's the piece. And that motivation definitely affects that.
And that sort of leads me to my two questions. I have two questions here, well, actually a few, that are specific to leaders that I think tie into motivation and their employees meeting their targets, right? Or performing up to par, if you will. And so the
Mhm.
first question is, what do leaders often overlook that shape behavior more than policies from your experience?
Ooh, so I would probably say the number one thing is the old aspect of do as I say, not as I do. So that creeps in a lot because there's a lot of some leaders will express these are the guidelines. This is what we should do. This is what's important. This is how we drive value. So I'll say one of the things, this was maybe about 10 years ago, I think it was when uh, somewhere around 10 to 15 years ago, when everyone was on the whole big kindness thing. Everyone was like, oh, clear is kind, and this is kind, and be kind, be kind. It was like, be kind everywhere. And
But you don't want to be kind, Quincy?
well, I think being kind is good, but I think when leaders say be kind, but those they lead see them do very unkind things, then yes, you're saying be kind and you're saying kindness is key and so forth. But what you're displaying and what you're reinforcing oftentimes is not that. And so that breeds a lot of mistrust, which is very toxic in any work environment. So I think that's one of the things that some leaders have had a habit of unintentionally reinforcing behaviors of mistrust because they say one thing and then they do another, and they want people to meet their expectations, but they're not actually even meeting their own.
And you hear that a lot where they say, don't just talk the talk, walk the walk.
Right.
right? And they say that a lot about leadership, particularly in the spaces you and I have been in, where they want to implement a solution or they want to try this next new thing, but then they don't want to change their behavior, right?
Yes.
If we're supposed to, have a monthly meeting and it's 60 minutes long or it's 30 minutes long and you start and end on time and, whatever, you receive feedback, that's for the
Right.
team. That's for someone else, but I don't
Right.
have to do that. As a leader, I'm not expected to change. And
Yeah.
that can't be in order for the entire team or system, as you mentioned, to change, right?
Right. Yeah. And that, I would say, in my experience, that's definitely been one of the top struggles of the transformation space, because a lot of leaders will look out to a consultancy and want people to come in and help them out and so forth. And even like during the whole agile thing, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds really good. That sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. And everything is from the perspective of like, okay, go do that. You all go do that thing. And it's like, no, you're going to have to be involved in this process. There is no transformation that's going to happen. There is no uh, improvement that is going to occur without leadership being involved in a very uh, intimate way. And not just because they're the leaders and they should be involved, but people also need to see their involvement. They need to see that they're not just giving a mandate, but that they are also adhering to this. They are supporting this. They are empowering this, and they're doing so in a very meaningful, intentional, purposeful way that people can see. Sometimes
Exactly.
people need to see it. Everyone
Yes.
can't just go by the words. They have to actually see it.
Yeah. Not just a name. You have
Mhm.
to do it as well. The action has to be there. So we talked about it. We touched on it a little bit already. Like, what do leaders often overlook? And then what are some behaviors, right? How do they unintentionally reinforce the problems that they're having? This
Right.
is so I'm sure you've seen a lot of this. How do they unintentionally reinforce the problems so that they just keep happening over and over again? A big one that I've seen is accountability.
Yeah.
They want to hold people accountable, but then they don't hold themselves accountable.
Right.
So then their employees look to them, well, it must be okay. You've modeled this behavior, so it's okay for me not to meet my deadlines or not, it's okay for me to not pull through or remember to follow up. What
Yeah.
other what other situations or behaviors have you seen leaders unintentionally doing that just keep reinforcing the problem over and over?
Sure. Yeah. So I fully agree with the accountability piece. And another piece that I would add to that is the empowerment piece, meaning giving people responsibility, but not giving them or not empowering them to act on that responsibility in a way that they need to. So I've definitely seen my share of leaders who kind of goes back to the thing, don't hire smart people and then try to tell them what to do. Uh, you know, they would hire someone, put them in this position, but then they don't want to let go enough for and empower that person to perform in that responsibility and in that role, which for that person becomes a very frustrating thing. And it really becomes frustrating for both parts because the leader who brought that person in to take on those responsibilities, well, they brought them in for a reason. And if they don't relinquish enough of that and learn how to uh, really monitor, not monitor isn't really the best word, learn how to um, observe their ability to perform and support them, then they themselves will find that they are going to actually be stretched thin. And that causes frustration for them. The person who they've put in this position that they're not empowering to perform the position becomes frustrated because they feel as though they can't move, they can't act, they can't do the thing, solve the problems that they so desperately want to do because they're being tied down by someone else's fear of empowering them. And so that becomes just a very vicious cycle, which oftentimes ends in someone resigning and they lose a good person.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
I've seen that. I've probably been a part of that. The resigning part anyway. So, so I want, like I heard you say stretch thin. So I want to look at this on the opposite side too. So the person who is being micromanaged, right, and monitored for every
right,
little thing, that's not a good feeling. But
right,
the leader that's monitoring them, that was the word that you used initially, right? Like was monitoring or paying attention to their work, they feel stretched thin. You use that word, stretched thin. And
right,
so many times when I'm coaching people, they tell me how they don't have time because they're doing other people's work because the other people can't do it right. And then they don't have time to do their own work. And I always bring it back to that empowering. They may do it wrong the first time. They may
right,
fail. It may take you 3 weeks to teach them how to do a process so that they understand it completely. But once they do, you're able to turn that work over or actually
right,
allow them to do their job in the first place. And that frees up your time as a leader to really focus on what you need to focus on. And I find that that's a
right.
problem for many people who are in higher levels, like mid management, excuse me, and above. Do you see that often?
Yes, definitely, absolutely. It's, similar to what I was mentioning earlier, it becomes a very, bad cycle when that occurs. And so it's it's good for those leaders to realize that while they may feel as though, oh, I don't have time to do this and I don't have time to do that, it's worth the upfront investment, both financially, uh, for morale, for team building. It's worth the upfront investment to say we're we're going to go a little slower at the beginning because there's a learning curve there. But man, once this individual get in their stride, you know, it's all going to be worth it. And truly, it generally is. And if it's not, then you figure it out really quickly that, hey, maybe this person is actually a little bit over their head in this situation. And then so you can maybe right size some of their responsibilities, a little differently. Um, but yeah, I am a big proponent for making that upfront investment of empowering the individual. Sometimes you may have to go a little bit slower to go fast. Those types of things that I am a big proponent of that whole concept.
So I'm going to shift and I'm going to ask a question that I'm sure everybody wants to hear. AI is the talk of the town. So it is the talk of the town.
It
Everybody's doing
is.
it. Am I right? I need to do it or I'm not going to get work, supposedly, and people are concerned that AI is going to replace their jobs. But as it becomes more and more a part of daily work, particularly in larger organizations,
Right.
leaders struggle a little bit like as they struggle maybe to navigate like AI and how they should implement AI. What capabilities do you think they need to develop in order to respond effectively to the use of AI and help lead their organizations through it?
So let me preface this by saying, number one, I think everyone's still trying to figure it out. I don't think anyone has, hit it right on the nail, just yet. Um, and I think that's for some different reasons. One, there's a huge shift generationally of what the workforce is it's starting to look like and how that's changing. Um, but as far as what should be incorporated. Uh, so one, we've heard a lot of people say, oh, AI is not going to replace people's jobs. It's going to be the person who uses AI. All right. So then that assumes that the skill set and the experience is already there. In my experience with companies with AI, and my own personal experience with AI, is that it is a very good tool to leverage, but it somewhat assumes that your knowledge base is such that you can catch what is right and what's wrong without AI. So for those workers who can do that, I think that part is fine. Uh, as we evolve and we figure out, how best to leverage AI in different companies, and in different spaces. But so I hope that answers that part of the question. But I did want to delve a little bit into that I do have more concerns about, which is the generation corporate wise, work wise, that's coming along that doesn't have enough of that experience to catch when something is actually wrong that sounds very right. That's a thing with AI because it sounds very right. Even though it's wrong,
Absolutely.
it's like a very confident person who has no idea what they're talking about sometimes.
You're right. I mean, I have challenged AI all the time. Like I
Hmm.
said this, that's not right, like, but that's to your point. I have the experience. I
Right.
know the information that I'm looking for. I know the information that I've put in there, and I can see when it's wrong.
Yes.
And I can either make the change on my own or I can tell it to change it. But
Right.
I really like that you brought up that point because right now, I'm hearing two separate topics and you just put them together. I'm hearing AI and I'm hearing the new generation coming on
Yeah.
board because that's a thing all on its own. But
It
putting
is.
those together, the AI and the new generation, that's a huge topic
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. And it, again, this is it's definitely a hot topic, uh, these days. And sometimes I do wonder, okay, are we looking at it in the same way that, there would have been a time where people would have said, oh, hey, if you don't grow your own food and you don't know how to garden, you don't know how to farm, oh man, your family's going to starve. You can't depend on the general store or the grocery store. You can't depend on that. You need to know how to do it yourself. And yes, but no, society changed and evolved and and so forth in different ways. So sometimes I do wonder if those aspects of AI that are similar to that I've had some concerns about really reflect that perspective. If things will move in a direction with AI that it evolves in a way that the things that we may be concerned about evolve along with it to where it's not as big of a concern as we might think. And
yeah, we just have to see how it
time would
goes.
tell.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
time
Like
will
I'm
tell.
kind of, yeah, I'm like you. I'm in the mindset. I kind of feel like it's moving in that,
Mhm.
evolving in that way, but I don't know. All I know is from my own experience.
Right,
Yeah, I would say, for that question, I would say really it's just the ability to adapt, right? With AI coming in and not really knowing how you're going to use it and what it might look like in your company.
right.
Because the ability to adapt, yeah, communicating, how
Yeah,
you're going to use it, how you're going to use it. And then it sounds like maybe some training too, um,
yeah,
for well, for anybody who requires it. Everybody
right.
probably needs training at some point.
And
Um,
I'll share one little. experience with Chat GBT that I thought was just hilarious. So hilarious and not funny at the same time. So there was a particular part where I needed it to change. It was like change like one thing within a large document, and it changed a lot. And initially, I thought it was the same until I kept looking at it, and I was challenging it, asking. I literally was saying, "Hey, did you forget this? Do you remember
Mhm.
that?" And the response was, yes, it's all there. I didn't change anything and so forth. And literally after maybe about four challenges, the response I got was, these were the exact words. I got to be honest with you. I can't access those files anymore. And so I rewrote it closely to what the original was, but I couldn't access the files had expired. So I couldn't write it verbatim anymore or, exactly anymore. And the fact that it responded saying, I got to be honest with you, which one acknowledges that it knew all those previous times exactly what it was doing. It
Right.
knew it knew what I was trying to challenge it with. It knew I recognized that something was wrong. Uh, and so while that is humorous to me, it does concern me that what about the person who didn't recognize that something was off and they couldn't see it well enough because they didn't have the background well enough to know? And so in the end, they end up with something very different, but they don't know it's actually very different. So like those things do they pique my interest to see, okay, how is this going to turn out?
I'm very curious. I know we've talked a lot about it in my master's program too, actually, because it's like, how do you recognize when somebody's using AI to help craft a message or a discussion board or even a paper? And it can be helpful to help you like sort of gather your thoughts, right, and put things together. And maybe if you're not the best with your vocabulary, but you've got your
Right.
general idea, AI is really good at adjusting those words if needed, right, to help you
Yes,
write a little bit better. And
absolutely.
and you can use that also. I know we're getting into AI now. We're going away, but it's like I guess maybe I'll tie it into the leadership or how it's being used in the organization. How can you also there's going to have to be some sort of training or learning about like how to recognize it,
Right.
I guess, too, when you don't want it being used or how to recognize like those mistakes, if you will. Like you said,
Yeah.
it puts together something that looks good, but it's not. So, um, maybe organizations can start thinking in that way too. How can we catch AI when it's not right?
Yeah, there was there was an article recently where the I guess the not the editor, but the author of the article apparently used AI because there was like a section in an article where AI is asking uh, if if the person wants it to do another revision or if it wants to, and they just completely missed it. And
Yep.
it's in a published article. Now, I don't know if you saw that,
No,
but
I
yeah,
haven't.
it's in a published article, and I don't remember exactly what the media was, but it wasn't a small outlet, if I remember correctly. Um, and so, those types of mistakes, which is really just kind of a careless thing of not being very thoughtful or thorough with, your review.
Hmm.
I think it's perfectly fine, in my opinion, for leaders to say, yes, by all means, use AI, but do not forget the authenticity of what we're doing. Do not let that part go. Um, and, just to make sure that, which to me kind of goes back to some of those division and the goals and values and, and so forth, because that helps to align how people approach using a tool. And that's whether it's AI or anything else. If you are grounded by those things, then it helps to know when the decision making is happening for each individual contributor, for each leader, for middle management, and so forth, that that is a part of the decision making process, which then helps things to stay within reasonable guardrails.
I appreciate how you tied that all together. So I'm going to ask you one final question, Quincy.
Sure.
Um, and this is for any leaders that are listening I don't know, to the podcast or even future leaders. What question do you think leaders should be asking themselves more often?
How can I be a catalyst for other people's gifts, gifts to shine in the context of our organization?
I don't even want to say anything after that. I want that to just sit there for a little bit
Yeah,
because I think too few leaders ask that question.
right. Yeah, I mean, we all have different gifts. We all have things that um, we acquire through experience, we acquire through our upbringing, we uh, acquire through exposure to different organizations and education and so forth. Some things that we may just be somewhat intrinsically, born with. Um, and I think that it is sometimes a disservice to the organization and to that individual when we do not make room for those gifts to shine in the right context of that organization. Some people are really good at certain things that could help the organization, could help that person also feel a great sense of accomplishment and purpose, but it's just not considered, at all. It's do your job and stay in this box, as opposed to do the job, but do it in a way that might be creative for you, but stays within the vision, the mission, the values, all those things. Um, I think you end up with better employees that way. I think you end up with more fulfilled people that way. And more fulfilled people just do better jobs. They're better to work
Empower,
with,
yep,
everything.
exactly. You empower them, you give them
Yeah,
some autonomy that goes into that sense of purpose. Um, but also, I think that's very powerful for people who may be struggling with some of their employees, whether it's accountability or they feel like they're not living up to performance in a certain way.
right.
It could be that they need to look at that person in a different way and ask that
Yeah,
question, a catalyst to for their gift, right? How do I take that gift uh, instead of
right.
looking at what they think they're not doing right and look at what they do well and help that person to get better in that area?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good, powerful question. Is there anything else, Quincy, that you want to mention as far as like systems thinking and transformation?
Uh, so I think that the aspect of clarity within a system is oftentimes overlooked. Clarity meaning how well do people understand different aspects of that particular system or that particular organization or the work that they're doing. I think there are a lot of assumptions sometimes that take place, and those assumptions are standing in the spot where clarity or understanding should be. And that causes a whole boatload of problems. But if you create that clarity, create that understanding, help remove some of those bad assumptions, then things can align, people can align, the system can align much better in those conditions. So if there was any parting thing or last thing that I would leave with, it would be that aspect of clarity.
So, how do you recommend? I'm a leader. I have those assumptions that my people know what's going on in my organization. They know about this $3 million project that we're doing, and they know what they're supposed to be doing. How do you help? Like, how do you help the leader create that clarity? What are some things you suggest or recommend?
So one, I think they should communicate it, and they should communicate it in, uh, you know, large and small forums within the organization. And just as important is make room for questions and be courageous enough to take those questions and allow people to ask those questions without the sense that retribution will be there if someone asks the wrong question or someone pushes the wrong buttons. And I don't mean someone being toxic intentionally. I mean someone that has a genuine I don't know, I want to understand type of perspective. People would might be surprised just how far that will go for leaders to be transparent enough to one, to have that conversation, and then two, to receive those questions and allow room for those questions, even if they don't have all the answers, because chances are they don't, even if they give one. Like no one knows it all. Uh, and a part, and a lot of the part depending on how much exposure you have within the organization. And of course, they have to be responsible with how they disseminate and share that information. But um, but that level of transparency and having that conversation, I think from what I've seen and what in my own personal experience as well, it takes you a long way, like very far. And you'll have people that are much more dedicated. They feel a lot more comfortable. They're a lot more confident in working within the organization, working, downline from you, as well. It makes a big difference.
I agree. Yep. So that's good. Good takeaways. Communication is key. Transparency is key.
Yes. Yeah.
For sure. So, Quincy, thank you. I really appreciate you joining. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
have you back on, when you get that book. We're going to talk
Yes.
more. I'll be honest with you, Quincy. I could have probably talked more and more on all these topics. So, I'm going to have you on a couple more times so we can go down some rabbit holes together. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to come on as often as you would like for me to.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so I'm gonna say good night to Quincy, and then thank you to everybody for listening, watching, and please like and subscribe.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.